We're in the middle of a series called This or That, all about comparison. And so if you missed last week, you can feel free to catch it on YouTube later or whatever. But to summarize, we were talking about comparison. Comparison means we hold this in our lives up to that in somebody else's lives. That's what we mean when we're talking about comparison. And oftentimes when we wrestle with feelings of comparison, it leads us to other kinds of feelings that are frustrating, anger, disappointment. When we look at other people's lives as the measure for our own lives, it leaves us feeling empty. And we talked about that a little bit last week, but this week we're going to talk about a specific vein of comparison that I think affects us all at certain times in our lives. And that is the feeling of jealousy. Now, I know you guys have been there. You know what it's like to feel a little bit of jealousy. When I was your age, it was when, cell phones were becoming a thing that everybody was starting to get. I know it's hard to imagine a world where not everybody had a cell phone, but I was in 8th grade and remember all my friends had cell phones. They were texting each other, and that's back when you had to use T9, and you probably don't even know what that is, but T9, and it was like a flip phone, or you had one of those blocks of a phone that was a cell phone, and you would play Snake, that was the game on there, or Tetris. And so those were your options. And I remember all my friends could text, and I remember thinking if I could just wake up on a Saturday morning, throw on my cartoons, and be texting friends. That would be the life. I had the feeling I would never need anything else again if I could do that. And of course, that's not how life works. But that was a real thing for me. And I was jealous every time a friend, they would get an upgrade or a new phone. It's I don't have a phone. Yeah. And so this one, it keeps growing, but it's not. Anyway, that was a bad joke. Sorry. The other ways I would get jealous a lot would be, when you like someone, you got a crush, and then you see somebody else flirting with them. Yeah, and then there's this fire that burns inside your soul to rip their ears off. That's a kind of jealousy that's not healthy, but that was one that I experienced. And what made it worse is when they flirted back. Sorry, that was too graphic. That's how I felt when I was in 8th grade, So jealousy is a thing. When we experience feelings of jealousy, it's not good for anybody, right? But it's what we feel when we want what somebody else has, right? When we experience feelings of jealousy, it's when the kid in your small group has a family that seems perfect and put together while your family's separated and you feel like there's something missing. It's when your sibling gets more attention than you do. It's when the other kid gets the solo that you tried out for. It's when that girl has better clothes. It's when that guy makes team captain. It's when you experience feelings that make you jealous that another person has what you want. That's jealousy. I know I just used jealous in my definition just then, but jealousy is when you experience feelings of frustration over somebody having what you don't, what you wish that you had. And it can often start from a lot of different places, but when we experience jealousy, what it does is it highlights our own insecurity, because it makes us feel insecure about ourselves or what we have or what we can do. And so jealousy already off the bat, it makes us feel things that God didn't create you to be timid or to be insecure. He created you to be whole and complete. But when we experience jealousy, we feel insecure. And those insecurities can also all lead to unhappiness, all kinds of unhappiness. Unhappiness with our stuff, unhappiness with our appearance, unhappiness with our friend group, with our family, with our status at school, just unhappy in general. Jealousy leads us to realize what we don't have and therefore be unhappy about it. And it's hard to see people with love when you're just unhappy. Maybe you don't end up that way. Maybe you go the other route and just end up angry. Angry that your parents would do this, angry that your friends would do that, angry that God would allow this to happen, just angry at life in general. Maybe just angry at the other person simply for having what you wish you had. Maybe we don't experience jealousy when we compare ourselves to others because we feel pretty good about our lives. Maybe we look around and we see other people and we have the brand new shoes, or we have the talent, the looks, anything that we want, we can seem to get pretty easily. And so we don't experience jealousy. But it's unhealthy because it begins a cycle where you suddenly realize that enough is never enough. And as soon as you enter into a new realm of friends, a new realm of social media where you suddenly see where everybody else has more than you. Suddenly enough will never be enough. Jealousy is pretty hard to combat. It's hard to see coming, and it's hard to overcome. But it doesn't just impact us, it impacts our relationships. When you experience jealousy, it affects the way that you react with other people. Sometimes it helps you to keep your distance from people because you don't want to interact with them. Maybe you just avoid them because you don't want to deal with what they have, or you don't want to be around them. You don't want to feel insecure. You just don't want to be around them. Or maybe we start talking about them behind our backs because even if they have what we don't, we can at least make ourselves feel better by talking about the things we don't like about that person. Or maybe we put them down to their face. We make them the butt of a joke. We make them feel insecure about themselves so that they, don't feel too good about what they have, right? Eventually, we stop being happy for people at all. It's hard to be happy for people. And we stop being able to celebrate the good things in their lives because it only reminds us of what's missing in ours. Now, that's a pretty tough place to be. That's a place that nobody likes to be around somebody like that. I know that you know that because I know you've been around people like that. They're just not fun to be around when they can't be happy for anybody, when you can't share your excitements with them without them making it about themselves. It's not fun to be around them. And that's what jealousy does. It keeps us from celebrating the good things around us, both in our lives and in the lives of others. And so there's the infamous air conditioner that is making noise again. That's what jealousy does. Sucks the life right out of you. There we go. I'm gonna spin that. Okay. So, but here's the thing. This is again not new. We talked last week about how comparison, it goes on. It's been around for thousands of years, ever since the beginning of life itself. We've been comparing ourselves to others, right? And then this week we're going to talk about jealousy. And again, this has been around for thousands of years. So all the way back to, we're going to go to the Old Testament today. We're going to read about the stories of King David and King Saul. They were kings of Israel. Saul was the first king of Israel. And David was, predicted to be the next king. Samuel, the prophet, came and said, you're going to be the next king of Israel. Well, Saul was still king at the time. And David, he had a bunch of brothers that were older than him and more qualified by any means. And Samuel goes, no, David, you're going to be the next king. But David was well liked eventually. He went around. One thing that helped his status was, defeating Goliath, which was pretty cool. He goes and, all his brothers and the rest of the army is, scared inside their tents while Goliath is out there taunting at them, making fun of God. And David goes, I'm not going to stand for this. He goes out there with those stones and he knocks Goliath out and it's pretty awesome. Yay, good story. Well, suddenly all Israel loves and respects David, and they go back, and in order to celebrate, as King Saul is entering town, they throw a parade and they celebrate the return of the army and King Saul, and they start singing the song and they start praising Saul for his victory. And Saul was pretty cool about that until they started singing about David too. In fact, that's what made Saul jealous, was Saul wasn't the only person getting all the glory. If we read what happens, this is how Saul reacts in 1 Samuel 18. It says, this made Saul very what? Angry. What's this? He said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. And you guys already see the story. Some of you, if you've grown up in church, you've heard the story a little bit. But this little feeling of jealousy, even when Saul met David on the battlefield and congratulated him for his victory, Saul was happy for him because David ultimately made him look good. And Saul had nothing against David until this moment. And then that's when jealousy creeped in. And when we compare ourselves to other people, we end up not celebrating others or ourselves in the process. And while everybody was celebrating Saul and David, Saul was unhappy with that because he wanted all the glory for himself. He didn't want anybody celebrating David, even if David did earn it. And I love the way that in the book of Proverbs, which most of the book of Proverbs was written by David's son, Solomon. Scholars aren't sure on this particular verse, but it's an interesting fact. When you're reading Proverbs, at least 2/3 of the time, it's Solomon who's writing. But in this verse, we don't know. But this is what the author says. He says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Envy is just another word of jealousy. envy rots the bones. In other words, jealousy impacts our lives from the inside out. You guys take in like anatomy or biology or anything like that? Like at least enough to know that like bones are like the core of who you are, that they're the shape of you. That's a song. All the muscles and the skin and the ligaments, they all attach to the bones at the core. The bones are at the core of who you are. And without bones, you would just be nimble and wouldn't really be able to do much of anything. But he's saying that if envy rots the bones, then it consumes you from the inside out. You can't function because the very thing that's holding you up, the very thing that's making your shape, the very thing that is at the core of you functioning as a human being cannot stand anymore. It rots. You deteriorate. In other words, envy will eat you alive. It will take away anything good in your life. And Saul, he ended up spending most of the rest of his days as king trying to hunt down and kill David. If you just read 2 Samuel, it's not a pretty story. Saul is pretty unhappy with the rest of his life. But I want you to recognize that when we stop comparing, we can better celebrate others and ourselves. It sets us up for better success in our relationships, with our own just happiness, and it allows us to really hear the things that God wants us to hear that maybe we're not listening to because we're so preoccupied with what everybody else has or does. That's just not a fun place to be. And so if you're trying to tackle this issue, if you're hearing this morning, you're thinking maybe this is something I really need to work on because I know that this is something that I wrestle with, then here's what I want you to recognize and what I want you to start doing in order to overcome this. One, it does start with you. So think about what you do have that's worth celebrating, because I kind of mentioned this last week, but when you stop focusing so much on what you don't have and start focusing on what you are grateful for, then that starts you on a downhill spiral to a much better place than just looking at what other people have versus what you have. So start celebrating what you do have. And you do have something to celebrate. Maybe you don't have the thing that everybody typically sees as the best thing to have or the best qualities to inherit. You are truly cherished by your Creator, and you have something worth celebrating no matter where you are. Whether it's the fact that you just worked up the guts to try out for whatever it was, or whether it's you are trying as hard as you can, whether it's maybe you may not be passing with all A's, but maybe you got a C or a D on something that you worked really hard for, and that was the best that you could do, but you should be proud that you did everything that you could, everything in your power to go as far as you could with the gifts and the talents and the resources that you have. Maybe it's just not even anything materialistic or anything like that, but you recognize that God actually did come into this world on your behalf in order to get to know you better and to build bridges to you because he cares about you and he loves you. And that's worth celebrating. So start with you. Start with what is worth celebrating in your life. Secondly, I want you to celebrate somebody else. And I know this is the much more difficult of the two, okay? I want you to celebrate the person that you're jealous of. Not just any random person, but I want you to figure out how you can celebrate the person that you feel the most envy towards. And whether that is to congratulate them on getting something that they tried out for, but maybe you also tried out for. But maybe that's congratulating them on a grade that they're happy about, or a goal that they made on the soccer field, or whatever it is. But celebrate someone else without making it about you, without it being a backhanded compliment, without any strings attached. Just try to celebrate somebody else. When we stop comparing, we can better celebrate others and ourselves. So as you guys get ready to go to your small groups, I want you to think about this question. What's one thing or person that I can celebrate right now? What's one thing or person that I can celebrate? And as you practice this, as you go to your small groups to discuss more about this, I want you to make it your prayer this week that God would just transform your mind and your heart to be more like his, to see people through his eyes, through the filter of love, as we talked about last week. I'm going to pray for you guys. You'll be dismissed to your small groups.